Hello, everyone, and welcome to Death Talk Unscripted. I'm Paula, your host, and I'm a death walker. And we're going to jump right into tonight's topic, which is a generation that refuses to caregive and what that means for America's dying. There is a generation that is rising that's coming up behind the baby boomers, and they're saying something that, quite frankly, this country never expects to hear. And as a baby boomer who is in the bottom portion of that, I believe I was born on the cusp between, the baby boomers and the Gen X kind of deal. And as a caregiver for a great portion of my life, over multiple people in my life, I still resonate very well with the baby boomers and stepping up to caregive. Of course, it's part of my nature. It's part of my personality. It's also part of my purpose, and as to why I was drawn to being a death walker, but also being so close at the end and almost being in the Gen X. I absolutely can feel and understand why so many of them are going to say, no, I will not sacrifice my life to a broken system. And I don't blame them. The system is completely broken, and now it's harmful and toxic. For decades, the United States has relied on quiet, unpaid, mostly female caregiving workforce. These are daughters, daughter-in-laws, partners, siblings, neighbors. And they somehow, it's their responsibility, it's their purpose to hold together a death care system that was never designed to function without them. And so this generation now that is entering midlife is different. They're burned out before caregiving even begins. They are financially underwater. They are emotionally done with toxic family systems. Many of them are refusing to be the next line of defense in a collapsing structure. And the country isn't really ready for what this means if you think about it. And each one of these is so relevant to what the climate of this country currently is. I mean, you look at any form of our healthcare system and it is a mess. It is collapsing. It is faulty structure. It is understaffed. We won't even talk about the medications and the supply chain and the shortages. And I won't touch birthing because I really don't deal much with that. But that's a whole nother part of the healthcare system that is completely changing. And death care has just, it is so far behind, and we are decades behind the rest of the world. Most of this generations that are coming up, when I say they're burned out before caregiving even begins, you got to look at what they're coming up against. 2 and 3 jobs, two-member households that still with 2-3 jobs cannot make ends meet. They're having a hard time paying their rent, keeping up with gas, and wanting a career. Most of them can't even afford to buy a house. And so now they're burnt out, and then they've got to step up and take care of a loving family member, or maybe it's not a loving, maybe it was a toxic relationship, maybe there was abuse. And some of them, they're struggling just to stay above water financially. They are one paycheck away from being evicted or losing their car or losing daycare. And so, yes, by all mental health, physical health, and social and soul health, yes, I absolutely understand why they're saying, no, that I will not do. I am already struggling. I am already finding it hard to be a citizen in America, let alone now you want me to give up everything, give up my income that I'm giving so that I can step into caregiving with a system that's never going to support me, that's never going to train me, that's never going to educate me. I get it. This caregiver generation that says no more. And for the first time in modern American history, and to my recollection, a significant portion of adults, they are just openly stating now, I will not move in with my aging parents. Most of them they're in a career, they're across the country, they're struggling their own way. Most of them are not willing to quit their job to provide care, because when they quit their job, they lose their insurance, they lose the means to keep the family afloat. Now we're talking serious issues that can develop after all this. The other thing that's occurring is a lot of them are saying, I will not be the default caregiver just because I'm the daughter. Just because I'm the female in the family doesn't mean that it's my job to fix everything, that it's my job to step in and, by default, just take over this role model. And the other thing is, not everyone is meant to be a caregiver. It's like everything else in this country. There are some who are meant to be warriors. There are some who are meant to be healers. There are some who are meant to be teachers. There are some who are meant to be caregivers. There are some that are meant to walk with the dying and the dead. And not everyone in the upcoming generation is suited to be a caregiver. Therefore, why should they have to do it? Why should they be bullied into it, shamed into it, guilted into it? The other thing that I hear a lot of is, I will not sacrifice my mental health for a system that gives nothing back. You see, most of them aren't objecting to caring for their loved ones. They're objecting to the system on which they have to do it, to the defining infrastructure that no longer is there. You have gaps everywhere in the whole caregiving situation. And the thing that blows my mind is caregiving is a $600 billion unpaid labor force. Think about that for a minute. When I'm talking about, I don't think this is cruelty for any of them to say, no, I'm not going to do it. No, I'm not going to stand up and be subjugated to being stripped of everything just to be a caregiver in a country that doesn't care about the elderly anyways. The elderly are no longer a viable part of this community anymore. I mean, most elders, they're not going to go out and buy a new house. They're not going to be huge consumerism. They're not going to keep going into debt for another 20 years. They're in their last quarter. They have, as far as our country goes, the country has squeezed everything they possibly can out of them. And now the country's doing it again, but they're starting in the generations and they're starting younger. So by the time these generations get into that middle-age deal, they're done. They're cooked. They're out. And I don't think this is selfishness on their part. A lot of people say, oh, they are so selfish. Oh, no. No, they're really not. They are actually stepping back and observing the situation. They have already watched other matriarchs, other caregivers, and they have seen that they end up homeless and moneyless and poor health and mentally unstable. And caregivers have the highest mortality rates ever. Some of them die before the person that they're actually taking care of. So this is a predictable outcome, in my opinion, of society. And that is we have just treated caregivers as disposable for generations. And, maybe 50 years ago, maybe 75 years ago, yes, it was an honor to step up. But there was a community behind them. there were still doctors and there were still enough nurses to go around. And even in the smaller communities, you had a backbone. You had people, you had families that weren't as fractured, they weren't as scattered. And even still, even if the families were scattered, there was still a backbone. But there's not that anymore. We have so much disconnection and we have so much isolation. And a lot of times people are they're just basically struggling to survive themselves. Some of the reasons too that we have to acknowledge when it comes up to these generations saying, no, I'm not going to do it, is because many of these adults grew up in homes that were marked by emotional neglect, maybe serious addiction, narcissistic parents, generational trauma, maybe estrangement, weaponized guilt. How about the golden child, the scapegoat dynamics? And I'm not saying that the baby boomers didn't have this, or the silent generation didn't grow up in these kinds of homes, but it was different. It was, at least in my household, we may have had a little emotional neglect. We didn't really have addiction to my knowledge. There was generational trauma, of course, and of course we had 10 kids, so it was kind of hard to gear who was going to be the golden child or the scapegoat. For me, I just knew when I was 8 years old, I was just drawn to taking care of this stuff. If there was a litter of puppies and the runt was going to die, I was right there with them caregiving. And so, there's estrangement too that we have to look at. There's generational trauma that's gone on, and narcissism is out of control. I mean, it is off the charts in this country, and somehow we idolize it, and we have made it a sign of a badge of some sort to stand up and say, I am a narcissist and I'm going to take care of myself, and every one of you all are rude. And we have grabbed hold of that. We have, and now we just dump it on people and we say, here, it's your problem, you handle it. And so these same families who caused harm, somehow they're expecting care. And we now have a generation that is raised and, that has been raised, and they have had to sort of fend for themselves and heal themselves rather than having a community and a backbone and a tribe to help this. They have ventured out on their own. And they don't, and the consequence, if you will, of this is that they have grown with an immense amount of confidence to say, I am not going to do this. Sorry. And now the families who are causing this harm, not only do they expect the care, but somehow they feel that they can shame or guilt or, threaten them. And the reason is the system assumes, and I go back to the system. Yes, there's a lot of problems with family, but even if they choose to stand up and say, okay, I'm still going to honor you as my mother and father, and I will help you, or my aunt, or whoever the person is that needs the caregiving. But I have to say that the system remains the same. The system assumes the family will always step in. They have no backup plan. They didn't plan for a single thing other than to say, oh, well, you figure it out. You handle it. But this generation is different. It's saying, I'm not stepping into that fire that burned me. I don't want to get burned again. And I don't think that there is anything that is out of line in making that remark. Let's talk a little bit about the economic reality. Most of them can't afford to caregive even if they wanted to. Let's talk some real numbers here, and not to shame, but to contextualize, if you will. Most Americans today are living paycheck to paycheck. One emergency within their own family, let alone once you step into the caregiving realm, and everything that can possibly go wrong will in fact go wrong over the course of your caregiving. You also have most Americans are working multiple jobs. So if both of the humans who are going to step into the caregiving are already working multiple jobs, how much time does that allow for them to caregive? And which one gives up their money? And how does the household survive if one of them has to give up the money and there's still not going to be enough time to suitably caregive for the loved ones? I mentioned this before. They're unable to buy their own homes. So they're drowning in student debt. They're relying on credit cards to survive. And we won't even talk about, you can't buy a house, so what are you stuck doing? You're stuck renting. And I don't know about where you guys live, but in the state that I live, an average 486-foot little square place is $1,500 a month. Now, you try to get a husband and a wife, 2 kids, and an elderly person caregive in a 486 square feet, and let me know how that works out for you. This is not a generation that has spare time, spare money, or spare emotional bandwidth. They've been stripped of it all. And let me go ahead and just remind you here too. Caregiving in America requires, this is how bad America is. This is how awful our forefathers set up this healthcare system. Caregiving in America requires unpaid labor, lost wages, reduced hours. It requires financial sacrifice. It requires you to have the knowledge of navigating the insurance companies. We'll just put United Healthcare right out there and say, yeah, what the fuck? Then you have managing medical crisis. And these are medical crises that, truthfully, you're not going to be trained in, and you're not going to be educated. You better know how to use an AI. You better know how to Google. You better know something, because I can tell you right now, most of your care team, they're not going to help you. They're already pushed to their limits. They're already understaffed. They're already burnt out from COVID and everything else. And it requires emotional endurance. And I got to tell you, some of the generations coming up, that is one thing that has just really hit our country. The emotional endurance is just not there anymore. And we're also redefining the emotional endurance. In my mother's and my grand's generations that I witnessed was, a lot of times they sucked it up and they shoved it down and they were quiet and they carried on. And when they were alone and when the women got together, there was, a whole bunch of, you can only imagine what was said and done in those rooms. And here's the bottom line. The most simplest thing about this is the next generation, they can't afford it. Not financially, not psychologically, and definitely not spiritually. I guess the biggest point I want to make right now as we're going into this podcast is there's a tidal wave that is coming, almost a tsunami, if you will. And no one's prepared for it. And I see it with the baby boomer generation. I see it as a death walker, and I see it as a caregiver. There's 55 million baby boomers still active that are still coming up and going to be in the active dying process. We're facing a demographic reality unlike anything else in the U.S. history. like I said a minute ago, the baby boomers are the largest aging population ever. 88 million of us. About 33, maybe 34 million have already died, but that still leaves an awful lot of baby boomers. The other thing is, people are just living longer with more chronic conditions. They're getting chronic conditions at 40, and they're living to be 90, and they need caregiving at 45. That's 40 years of caregiving. We won't even talk about dementia or Alzheimer's. Heck, some of these people, some of that could be a 50-year caregiving gig. They require more care than previous generations, and they require that simply because of the chronic conditions, simply because of all the cancers, because of all the side effects, because people are taking more pharmaceutical pills than ever before, and so there's one side effect after another, and another pill to fix that side effect, and another pill to do this, and pretty soon it's just an overwhelming amount of care. Another thing that is occurring is there are fewer children to provide that care. I come from a large household. We had 8 kids, and so, the chances of having one of us be a caregiver were pretty good in those odds. But a lot of households only have one child, maybe 2. And that's about it. So there's going to be a smaller demographic of just human beings that are able to care for them. And then the very last one we've talked already about, many of the children they're just estranged and they're unwilling. And this is a tidal wave, people. And here's the saddest part. This country is standing on the shore with a paper cup going, okay, fill it up, I can handle it. But the deeper crisis is truly this. When one generation opts out of caregiving, the shortage doubles for the next. Think about that for a minute. When one generation opts out of caregiving, the shortage doubles for the next, and then it triples for the one after that. So not only is there a tidal wave coming and we're standing there holding a paper cup, acting like we're ready for it, but we haven't taken a step back and looked at the big picture. And that's what happens in 2 decades from now. Who stands up and who's left to caregive? AI? Please, don't even get me started on that. That'll be a whole nother podcast. And so I guess opting out doesn't just affect today's elders. It's going to reshape the entire caregiving landscape. Fewer caregivers, more fractured families, more emotional distance, more economic instability, and more people aging alone. 3 generations from now, the U.S. will have twice the number of elders needing care. Here it comes. Wait for it. Half the number of available caregivers, a deathcare system stretched beyond collapse. You'll have families that are too fractured to rely on one another. It'll be, and not maliciously, it'll just be because of the disconnection and the isolation that we constantly feed in this country. And communities, they're too underfunded to fill the gaps. And that's just the bottom line. And they keep getting cut. My next podcast, I'm going to talk about rural care. And man, you talk about communities being underfunded. Damn. This isn't a temporary crisis either, people. And if you think, oh, this is going to pass, oh, it'll pass. But you're not going to like what comes next. And a lot of you are going to be standing there with your paper cups going, what the hell? There's nothing in it. Who's filling it up? I don't know. What's the game plan? We better start thinking about it now. This is a generational cascade. And unless we build something new this tidal wave will not just drown the dying, but it's going to drown the generations that follow. And it's going to keep drowning. I don't know about any of you, but drowning is not a good way to die. Is it morally wrong to refuse to caregive? This was a funny question that I heard in, I guess it was a webinar or something. And when I heard it, I waited for them to tell me to hear what the answer was. And they went on, and none of the answers were what was floating in my head. The first thing that floated through my head when I heard the host ask this question was, this isn't a question for society to answer. It's not a community project for you all to decide whether someone should step up to caregive. Frankly, it's really none of your business. This isn't a question for moral pundits or politicians. It's really not. Again, the person who has to step into the caregiving role, they will enter two worlds. They will have to live in two worlds. They'll have to live in the world with the caregiving, and they're going to have to try to live in the world so they can continue to raise their children, have a home, and have some sort of, retirement to begin with. This is also not a question for guilt-ridden siblings or judgmental neighbors. It's none of anyone's business but the caregiver themselves. It is something that each one of us have to look inside of ourselves and see if we can, if we have what it takes to do that. And if we don't, it's okay. But we need to find other systems. We need to have a backup plan. This is a question that truly only the individual soul can answer. And here's the way it's going to go. Some will step forward and some will step back. Some will choose to care for people and others are going to choose to distance. Some will simply have to choose survival because that's all they can do, is just survive themselves. There is no universal right answer to that question. That's why it should never, ever be asked. There is only the truth that each person must live with. I'm going to ask this question and I'm going to answer it at the same time. How does this end well? It doesn't, folks, unless we change. Unless we, the collective will, the collective inside, decide to put every ounce of our will into building new care models. How about integrating doulas and death walkers rather than we are rising and we are in solid numbers here. And I know a lot of it is people, a lot of the death doulas and death walkers are merging towards it being some sort of business avenue. That's fine. But we still have gaps to fill. And, you know, through the hospice system, I can think of so many ways a death doula could be of value and could offer purpose. But somewhere along the line, the hospice have drawn a line and said, no, that's our territory. That's what we want to do. We can't. So we have to figure out how to integrate and how to connect again and how to stop being in that narcissistic thing of, oh, this is mine. And, you know, we need to fund community-based care again. We need to get back to the community. We need to start building those backbones again. We need to create caregiver stipends and not $155 a month. Are you kidding me? That doesn't even buy basic groceries of milk and bread anymore. We need to redesign hospice and palliative care. Hospice hasn't been updated since 1985, people. And palliative care, most of you out there couldn't even possibly tell me what palliative care is unless you looked it up. We have to train professionals in communication and compassion. And you know what? That's something where death walkers and death doulas could stand up. A lot of us, we are very compassionate and our communication skills are outstanding. We cannot keep plugging holes with human beings. We cannot keep sacrificing caregivers to save broken institutions. We have to put the person above the institution. We cannot keep pretending the system works when it doesn't work. We are whispering now, and that is progress. But whispers are not going to save us. We're talking about death more than I have ever heard it talked publicly, socially, social media platform, the news, everything. But it's still a whisper. And those whispers aren't going to save us. The death doula certifications, they're not going to save us. The death doula schools, they're not going to save us. Celebrities becoming death doulas are not going to save us unless they're going to figure out how they're going to actively fill the gaps. And the gaps are at the bottom of the rung. They're not at the celebrity top of the rung. We need to speak louder. That's what I do. I speak as loud as I possibly can, and I speak as prominent and as honestly and as clearly as I can. We need to build faster. We need to imagine boldly. We need to create new constructs, new models, new ways of caring for the dying that do not rely on the unpaid suffering of the living. And I'll tell you what before I close. Because if we don't, the tidal wave will not just drown the dying like I mentioned before, but it's going to drown the generations that follow for up to the next 5 to 6 decades. So when a caregiver steps up now and says, no, I will not sacrifice myself for a broken system, listen to them, because they have a point. And if we don't start listening and reconnecting, you have no idea what's coming, folks. Absolutely none. I want to thank you all for listening to me tonight, and I want to say how much I appreciate each and every one of you tuning in. Be well. And one more thing, please remember always that honesty is clarity, avoidance is confusion, and most of all, presence is a skill. So much love. See you next time.